In a world where power is everything, there is a 30-year-old man named Rick, getting beaten up and collapses to the ground. He thinks this is the end. But we learn he isn't dying. He's being trained by the strongest and terrifying adventurers in the world. Let's explain it later in detail. For years, they've beaten him down, only to make him stand back up. And now, after endless pain and suffering, his seniors finally give him the green light and tell him that he's ready for his final test. The scene shifts to the Adventure Guild, where people registering for the year rank exam as the receptionist, Alyssa, guides them. When it's Rick's turn, she immediately recognizes him. Turns out, they used to work together before he quit to chase his adventurer ambitions. As they talk, she realizes he's been MIA for 2 whole years, only to return now for the E-rank exam, which, by the way, most people take in their teens and pass within 2 years. Rick, at 32, is basically a fossil among rookies. Before he can reflect on his questionable life choices, a drunkard starts hitting on Alyssa. Rick tries to de-escalate the situation and holds the man back. But then, the guy just suddenly collapses on the floor. Rick assumes he was just too drunk, but when the others check on the unconscious man, they notice a handprint on his armor. Suddenly, everyone is freaking out because this dude is actually a former A-rank adventurer, and Rick somehow knocked him out without even realizing it. With that chaos behind him, Rick gets his exam ticket, only to see an unlucky number on it. Great, just what he needed. Feeling a bad omen creeping up, he heads out to meet one of his seniors named Renette, the Big Hot Chocolate. Meanwhile, back inside the guild, people are still trying to figure out what happened to the A-rank guy, and Alyssa comes to a terrifying realization. Rick knocked him out cold with a casual grip. The scene shifts to the physical assessment room, and whispers fill the room as everyone realizes Rick is 32. The first test requires examinees to measure their mana levels by placing their hands on a crystal ball. Most candidates get decent readings, but when Rick steps up, his mana level is revealed to be F-, the lowest possible. Everyone laughs at him, but after he leaves, the crystal ball suddenly shatters mysteriously. The next test involves attacking a slime bag to assess offensive capabilities. Seeing the slime bag reminds Rick of his terrifying master Brune, who forced him to punch an indestructible golden slime bag that is harder than a dragon's fang 50,000 times in a day. Rick remembers thinking it was impossible, but Brune nonchalantly demonstrated by obliterating one and say he can do 200 of them at once. No big deal. The scene shifts to the present. 11-year-old boy named Freed steps up first, unleashing an advanced 3rd-level pyromagic spell. Despite its small size, the judges call him a genius. Rick, recalling the massive firestorms he endured during training, wonders if Freed just condensed his attack for indoor use. When it's Rick's turn, the examiner suggests he just forfeit. But Rick, fueled by 2 years of nightmare training, refuses. He punches the slime bag with everything he's got, and it completely shatters. Silence falls as he punches the slime bag, and the entire room is in shock, including Freed, who just had his moment stolen. But he tells himself it's fine, because defense magic is his specialty, and he'll prove it in the next test. The defense test begins, and Rick has to block an attack from an examiner. The first spell is a 4th-level attack, and Rick deflects it with ease. The examiner, stunned, decides to test him with a 5th-level cyclone spell. Even the barrier surrounding them is destroyed, yet Rick remains standing, completely unfazed. This event sends shockwaves, even catching the attention of top-ranked Royal Knight Sylvester Selnia, who rushes to the scene to witness Rick's absurd abilities firsthand. Next up is the written test. After finishing, Rick meets up with Renette, who asks how he did. Confidently, he claims he'll ace it, but admits he's unsure about his practical results. That's when Freed shows up, still fuming, demanding a rematch. But before Rick can process what's happening, Freed's older sister Angelica storms in, declaring that Rick made her brother cry. She throws her glove at him, challenging him to a duel. Rick, thinking it's just laundry, picks it up, only to be told by Renette that he just accepted the challenge. Does he have no brain cells? Angelica, a 2nd-class Royal Knight known as B-rank adventurer, lays down the stakes. Whoever loses must serve the winner for life. Rick panics, knowing she's way out of his league, but Renette reminds him of his grueling training. Rick, reminiscing about his suffering, immediately throws up. However, after regaining some composure, He faces Angelica in the arena. She promises to hold back so she doesn't kill him, then enhances her speed with magic and dashes in for an attack. But Rick dodges effortlessly. The crowd is stunned. Only first-class knights should be able to react that fast. Angelica refuses to believe it and attacks again, but Rick still finds her too slow, wondering if she got her title through nepotism. Just as he prepares to dodge again, Angelica trips on a rock, spiraling wildly. Rick barely avoids getting hit, thinking she's a genius for using unpredictable movements. Angelica, completely embarrassed, pretends she did it on purpose and triples her speed. She keeps attacking, and he finally prepares to counter, but then she trips again. This time, the sheer force of her stumble creates a massive crater. Realizing she would have died if she hadn't tripped, Angelica suddenly rethinks everything. She declares Rick the winner and runs away before he can remind her of their servant contract. The next day, the results are announced. If a participant's admission card glows red, they fail. If it turns blue, they pass. Rick's card flickers between red and blue, making him nervous, but it finally settles on blue. He passes. As he leaves with Renette, he suddenly catches a strong scent. A noble-looking boy approaches them, introducing himself as Raster, Duke of the Northern Kingdom. He immediately starts hitting on Renette, offering to make her his second wife. Rick steps in, and Raster calls him an ugly old man. Rick brushes it off, saying Raster doesn't look strong either, only for Raster to smugly reveal that he's an A-rank adventurer who reached that rank at just 14. He invites Renette to have dinner with him, but she tells him to back off because she's Rick's girlfriend, and she mentions that his perfume is too strong for her liking. Raster becomes so upset and says he's going to give Rick a hard time in the next test. The scene shifts to a bar where Fried and Angelica appear, revealing Raster is their older brother. They whine about how Rick humiliated them, so Raster promises to make Rick pay. The second stage of the exam begins, a mock battle, and Renette warns Rick to hold back. But thinking about Raster, Rick decides he'll need to go all out. Just when he braces himself for a tough fight, the examiner calls for Rick's opponent, a completely different guy named Lynx. Rick, relieved beyond words, realizes he just might survive another day in this ridiculous world of adventurers. Just when he thinks he's got a handle on things, Lynx, the examiner, suddenly falls ill, and guess who's taking over? None other than Raster, the man of 1,000 spells, also known as the F-rank crusher. Yep, Rick is in deep trouble. The guy has a reputation for making F-rank hopefuls regret ever dreaming of becoming adventurers. Rick briefly considers running away, because honestly, who wouldn't? But then he remembers that if he fails, his seniors will triple his training, and that might be even worse than facing Raster. Just when things couldn't get weirder, a mysterious hooded kid approaches Rick and offers to predict his future. Now, any sane person would say no, but Rick, of course, he sits down, because he has only muscles, not brain cells. But before he can even hear if he's destined for greatness or disaster, Renette notices something's off, but it's too late. Rick vanishes in the blink of an eye. Furious, Renette obliterates the so-called fortune teller's crystal ball, revealing that it was actually Fried. She doesn't even hesitate. She grabs him and threatens to take away his precious eyesight unless he spills the truth. Panicked, Fried confesses that Rick was teleported about 100 meters away. The scene shifts straight to a beach, filled with people dressed in all black, and they're not here to offer Rick a warm welcome. Turns out these guys are part of Raster's special test, and their mission is to get rid of Rick. And they're all B rank or higher. So yeah, Rick's chances of survival are looking pretty slim. But before things get out of hand, Rick's terrifying seniors show up, and they are not amused. Rick pretends it's all part of a warm-up, and even warns the men to run if they value their lives. One guy attacks, and his sword shatters against Brune's skin. The guy tries to punch Brune instead, but his fist breaks on impact. Brune just tells him to keep practicing more. Miz, another terrifying senior, takes out his magical gun and starts blasting the enemies away, while Alice, another terrifying senior who looks like a kid, gets taken hostage. The fool holding her starts making demands, but before he can finish, Alice gets really mad and obliterates all of them in one powerful blast. The leader of the goons finally realizes who they're up against. Alice, the strongest mage in the world. Miz, the greatest weapon craftsman. Brune, a master of all support magic. Together, they form the Orichalcum Fists, the most overpowered adventurer party in existence. At this point, the enemy is just praying for mercy. While his seniors handle the mess, Rick bolts back to the exam hall, desperate to find Renette. As he arrives, she's literally throwing Freed across the room. That's when Lynx appears, revealing that Raster forced him to step down and locked him away. He warns Rick to leave for his own safety. But Rick? He's not backing down. He's got something to prove. Meanwhile, Raster is inside the arena, absolutely wrecking the other candidates. A man named Adolf watches from the stands, using his ability to see people's core stats: strength, dexterity, mana capacity, and magic control. He checks Raster's stats and immediately regrets it, because Raster's mana is so overwhelming that it hurts to look at. But then he notices Rick walking into the arena and decides to scan him too, and immediately starts rolling on the ground in pain. Because Rick's stats are maxed out in every category except mana, even Adolf can't comprehend what he just saw. And speaking of Raster, before the fight begins, he actually praises Rick for escaping his guards. But that doesn't mean he's taking it easy on him. Meanwhile, Renette meets Alice, who introduces herself as Rick's former co-worker. Brune asks Renette what she thinks of Rick, and she confidently says he'll pass. Alice, however, isn't so sure. She knows Raster destroys F-rankers like it's a hobby. The battle begins with Raster launching an ice blast, but Rick doesn't move. Raster assumes he's paralyzed with fear. Rick is just following Renette's advice to stay calm, observe for a full minute, and then act. Raster, getting impatient, unleashes a massive explosion. The result was the same. Rick stands there, completely unharmed. Alice is shocked, and Brune takes this opportunity to flex about Rick's brutal training regimen. 100 kilo ankle weights, running through forests filled with demonic snakes, and all sorts of insanity. Raster keeps attacking, but Rick remains cool as ever. Miz, Renette, and Brune reveal that they were the ones who trained Rick. Miz was his magic trainer, Renette sharpened his dexterity, and Brune handled his physical conditioning. Alice is stunned. She thought Renette was just a maid. But no, she's a total beast. Brune also casually drops that Rick is actually S-rank level in strength, but has no idea how powerful he really is. Raster, now frustrated, creates a massive tree golem and traps Rick. Thinking the fight is over, Raster starts celebrating early. Rick calmly uses Airshot, a basic spell he has practiced over 100 million times, and instantly breaks free. Everyone is stunned. How is that even possible? Brune explains that Rick achieved it using special time and space magic, allowing him to train far beyond normal human limits. Raster, now desperate, pulls out his strongest spell. But Rick counters with Airshot again and completely overpowers him. The impact is so strong that Raster is sent flying into the stands, knocked out cold. The crowd is shocked, and F-rank just defeated the strongest examiner. Rick reunites with his party, and they celebrate his victory. Raster, still trying to keep his dignity, tells Rick that he'll definitely crush him in the next exam. His siblings follow him out, but Angelica, his sister, pauses, turns back, and bows to Rick before leaving. Rick is confused but doesn't dwell on it. As Rick and Renette wait for the final results, she notices something strange about Rick. Rick was so nervous before, but is now completely calm. She asks why, and he casually explains that he just remembered something important. Flashback to Rick as a kid, reading about Yamano the hero, who dreamed of defeating the legendary Kaiser Elpis to claim a treasure that grants any wish. Inspired, little Rick declared that he too wanted to be an adventurer, but when he told his parents, they immediately shut him down. His father dismissed it as a fairy tale, and his mother worried it was too dangerous. They both told him to find a stable job instead, and yet here he is now, on the verge of proving everyone wrong. But Rick had one dream: to become an adventurer. Ever since he was a kid, he fantasized about wielding a sword, fighting monsters, and collecting loot like some RPG protagonist. But there was just one problem. He was born with no special skill, or so he thought. One day, a doctor tells him that he actually has a unique skill that just hasn't been activated yet. This gives him hope because Yamano, a legendary adventurer, had the same type of skill. Rick is ecstatic, thinking he's destined for greatness. But as years pass, nothing happens. No sudden power-up, no hidden talent awakening, just endless disappointment. His friends suggest he still try becoming an adventurer, since even skillless people can make a decent living. But Rick isn't interested in being just another sword for hire. He wants to be legendary. Eventually, reality sets in. Tired of waiting for his skill to activate, he takes a job as a guild receptionist, much to his parents' relief. 14 years have passed. 14 years of filing papers, watching others go on epic quests while he's stuck behind a desk. He still tries to activate his skill in secret, but nothing works. Frustrated, he finally gives up, locking away the childhood book that once inspired him. His life turns into a routine, until one day, his old friend Zaid shows up. Zaid, now a full-fledged adventurer, proudly announces his success. Rick congratulates him, hiding his jealousy behind a forced smile. That night, Rick drowns his sorrows in booze, regretting ever giving up. But before he can spiral too deep into self-pity, he hears screams. A massive monster appears in the city. Renette shows up like it's just another Tuesday and walks towards the monster. But Rick blocks her, trying to protect her, not knowing how strong she is. She instantly slices the monster into tiny pieces before he can even blink. Turns out, she's an S-rank adventurer. Rick is both impressed and devastated. Seeing her strength, he wonders if he's wasted too much time, if it's too late for him to chase his dream. Renette bluntly confirms his fears. His mana capacity is fixed due to his age, meaning he'll never reach his full potential. It stings, but he keeps a smile and invites her to dinner. To his surprise, she accepts. The next day, Rick is actually in a good mood, but fate isn't done messing with him yet. Just as he's about to meet Renette for dinner, monsters attack the city again. She tells him to lead them to her, and in a single move, she wipes them all out. Just when everyone thinks it's over, Renette's face goes pale. A dragon appears, and not just any dragon, a nightmare-tier monster. Zaid and the other adventurers try to fight it, but their attacks bounce off like pebbles against a fortress. Worse, the dragon traps them all inside a magic barrier, cutting off any escape. Panic sets in. But then, Rick does something insane. He steps forward and declares that he'll fight it. Everyone stares at him like he's lost his mind, but he's dead serious. "If I have to die, I want to die as an adventurer," he says, igniting a fire in the others. Inspired by his resolve, they charge in alongside him. The dragon, unimpressed, swats Rick like a fly, pinning him to the ground. Just as everyone assumes he's dead, something incredible happens. His long-awaited skill finally activates. Mana surges through his body. His strength skyrockets, and he lifts the dragon's foot with one hand like it's made of paper. Overwhelmed with joy, Rick laughs as he challenges the dragon to try again. It breathes fire, but Rick blocks it. Then it fires a laser, but he deflects it easily. In one final clash, Rick defeats the dragon, leaving everyone, including himself, stunned. The adrenaline rush knocks him out, and he wakes up a week later with Renette waiting beside him. She invites him to join Orichalcum Fist, a legendary party, saying their goal is to defeat the Kaiser, the ultimate evil. She tells him that despite his age, he can still become a great adventurer. Overwhelmed, Rick cries. It's the first time anyone has encouraged him to chase his dream. In the present, after the test is over, his friend Lynx visits to congratulate him on passing the test. Lynx is confused when Rick asks him to wear his best armor, thinking they're just going for a casual visit. Following Rick's directions, he ends up at the Demon Lord's castle. Wait, what? Lynx wonders if he's in the wrong place, but Rick opens the door, apologizing for making him come so far. Lynx notices that despite being a demon castle, there are no monsters. Rick casually explains, yeah, they don't come near. Suspicious. Inside, Lynx meets Alice, a powerful young mage. She immediately blasts Rick with lightning for fun, but Rick barely deflects it, destroying part of the wall. Renette deducts the damage from Alice's food budget, making her pout. Rick, knowing she'll just cause more chaos, decides to play with her for a bit. Meanwhile, Lynx explores the castle and finds Miz testing a rocket launcher. Lynx, intrigued, fires it and is nearly blown off his feet. He realizes that if such weapons were mass-produced, they could change the face of warfare. Next, Lynx meets Brune, the party's strategist, surrounded by a personal library. Thinking Brune is just a scholar, Lynx asks if he's read all the books. Brune casually explains he's been too busy training Rick. That's when Lynx asks Brune to teach him one or two things to become stronger. Brune agrees to teach him, but Brune's training is brutal. The scene shifts to the high cliff. Within minutes, Lynx is thrown off a cliff, nearly dies, and lands on a beast Renette just killed for dinner. Surviving barely earns him a break before Brune drags him back for more training. Over dinner, Lynx teases Rick about his relationship with Renette. Rick insists they're just comrades, but Lynx, smirking, reveals he and his wife have a 20-year age gap. Rick is stunned into silence. Later, Rick and his party prepare for their next quest, but the guild master informs them they need a fourth member. Brune tells the guildmaster to bring someone to fill the fourth member. The guildmaster tells a girl named Ray to go with them, because she wanted to go on a quest with a high danger level. With the team assembled, their next adventure begins, with Rick finally stepping into the life he always dreamed of. As they set off on their mission, Ray wonders if they're searching for something valuable. Rick casually explains that they're after a magic stone, which immediately sparks dollar signs in Ray's eyes as she asks if they can sell it for a high price. Rick quickly shuts down her dreams of wealth, warning her that the stone attracts monsters. Ray, completely unfazed, flexes her confidence, assuring him she can handle anything that comes their way. Curious, she asks about his adventurer rank, and when he sheepishly admits he's only F rank, she assumes he just got a late start, definitely not wanting to be in the same boat as him. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Renette worries about everyone's safety, but Ms., ever the optimist and pervert, believes they'll be fine, especially since Brunt is with them. However, Miz's priorities quickly shift as he unveils his latest invention, an air pump designed to lift skirts. Before he can bask in his moment of perverted genius, Renette catches on and promptly turns his machine into scrap metal. Meanwhile, Rick and the group stumble upon a wyvern, which instantly sends Ray into panic mode, fearing it'll call for backup. But before she can even finish her sentence, Rick casually punches the wyvern away. Ray, horrified, warns him that he just signed their death sentence because more wyverns are bound to show up. Rick remains as chill as ever, insisting he has a plan, though Ray is too busy freaking out to listen. True to her fears, another wyvern comes crashing down near them. She's ready to bolt, until she realizes that Brune and Alice are absolutely obliterating every wyvern in sight. Just as she's about to breathe a sigh of relief, a red wyvern, far stronger than the others, descends before them. Ray, suddenly a walking Wikipedia of monster rankings, informs them that even an A-rank adventurer would struggle against it and strongly suggests they run. Rick, of course, completely ignores her advice, saying he needs to test something. He tells Ray to escape, but she, now feeling oddly loyal, decides to fight alongside him. Just as she starts casting a spell, Rick once again does the most Rick thing possible. He punches the wyvern's head clean off. Ray is left speechless. The next day, Ray reports to the guildmaster about her recent life-changing experiences, mentioning that Rick and the others took a wyvern corpse back with them to eat. The guildmaster had hoped that spending time with Rick would talk some sense into her, but instead, she's more fired up than ever to get stronger. Meanwhile, Rick and the team finally discover one of the magic jewels. Ms. activates the jewel with his magic, revealing a map that indicates the next stone's location, Heratopia. Flashback time. 400 years ago, the legendary fourth king, Alexander of Heratopia, built a coliseum in the town of Knuckle Perry. He fought using only his fists and maintained a ridiculous winning streak of 10,000 matches. Upon reaching Heratopia, the group gazes at Alexander's statue, prompting Brune to fantasize about fighting him. Rick points out that such a fight would likely level the entire country. As they try to gather intel on the 6 magic jewels, the townspeople take one look at them and scatter like cockroaches. Rick suggests heading to the town hall, but before they can leave, they witness a girl named Militia being harassed. Brunt steps in to scare off the guy named Gold, but the man doesn't even flinch. Instead, he boasts about being a fighter. Brune, unimpressed by Gold's frail appearance, provokes him, and the two head to an alley to brawl. Seconds later, Gold is on the ground, thoroughly defeated. Once things settle, Brune shows them the magic jewel and asks if they've seen anything similar. Gold and Militia recall seeing one, but can't remember where exactly. Before they can jog their memories, a grand announcement parade kicks off for the Fist King tournament. Gold points out that the current champion, Kellen Wolf, has been on a 3-year winning streak, and, plot twist, one of the magic jewels is embedded in his championship belt. Kelvin heads to his gym, where an old man apologizes for making him participate in the parade. Kelvin assures him it's fine and says a fighter's duty is to entertain. The old man asks how he's feeling, and Kelvin admits that while he's fine, he'd love to face someone strong for a change. Enter Rick and the crew, who storm the gym. The old man mistakes them for fans, but before Rick can explain their actual intentions, Brune bluntly demands the championship belt. He claims the jewel belonged to their former party member, but the old man has no patience for sob stories and prepares to kick them out. However, Kelvin, intrigued by their tale, stops him. Despite believing their story, he refuses to hand over the belt since it holds significance for the people of Heratopia. The only way to get it? Win the Fist King tournament. Realizing there's no other choice, Brune leaves the gym. The old man scolds Kelvin for letting them go, but Kelvin, grinning, explains that if we had made a scene here, we would have definitely been dead. While all of them are strong, he can tell Brunt is the real deal, and he can't wait to fight him. Brunt informs Rick and Renette that they need to enter the tournament. To qualify, they must pass regional qualifiers held in the east and west parts of the city. Winners from each side will then compete in a league, and the last man standing gets a shot at the tournament. Brunt assigns Rick to the West League while he takes on the East. Rick worries about Brunt being alone, but Brunt reassures him. He's already hired Gold as his guide. Renette informs Rick that before entering the qualifiers, he must pass a test. As he heads to take it, he's told his test is a mock battle. His opponent is a fighter who has won all of her qualifiers. The official assures Rick that even if he loses, he'll advance as long as his abilities meet the standard. And then, surprise, his opponent is Angelica. She's shocked to see Rick and asks if Brunt is with him. When he says no, she reveals she came alone but admits she's no match for him since he defeated her brother. Determined, she attacks with full force and immediately trips. She gets up to try again, trips again. Turns out, Rick is using a new technique where he continuously sweeps his opponent's legs until they surrender. Angelica, stubborn as ever, refuses to give up, forcing Rick to acknowledge her resilience. He finally prepares to fight seriously, only for Angelica to suddenly surrender. Classic. After the match, Angelica, now an emotional wreck, meets with Rick and bursts into tears. He takes her to Mish's restaurant to calm her down. She asks why he's in Herotopia, and he explains he's aiming for the Fist King tournament. Angelica reveals she became a fighter 4 months ago and also needs to enter the tournament. However, she believes it's impossible for Rick to qualify since one must win 40 matches within 6 months and only 1 week remains. Renette, grinning, drops a bombshell. They've already registered Rick for 40 matches over the next 4 days. The next day, Rick heads into his first fight against Grit Albert, a man rumored to use illegal weapons. A body check clears him until he pulls out an impact stone hidden in his shoe and lands a punch on Rick. Thinking he's won, Grit is in for a rude awakening when he realizes he broke his own hand. Rick advises him to train more and then demonstrates a technique where he misses a punch but knocks Grit out with the shockwave alone. Meanwhile, Angelica effortlessly wins her match, launching her opponent into a wall. With 40 wins secured, she qualifies, but Rick still has a mountain to climb. Angelica tells Rick he can only participate in 1 match per venue in a day, and even though there are a lot of venues around the country, they're pretty far apart, so it isn't possible for him to fight in 10 matches.
Angelica mentions that his next flight is 30 kilometers away, so even if he takes a carriage, he won't reach it in time. But Rick, being Rick, just shrugs and says he's in a hurry, so he's going to run there. After he dashes off, Renette wonders if Angelica wants to see his matches. Angelica admits she does, but she doesn't think it's possible. Renette grabs Angelica and starts hopping across rooftops like some kind of parkour champion. Angelica, naturally, is screaming the whole time. After 4 days of intense fights, Angelica is in disbelief. Rick actually won 40 matches. She's relieved that he isn't in her block because, let's be real, she knows she wouldn't stand a chance. Renette asks if Angelica plans to win her league, but she just sighs. With Rick participating, her chances are basically non-existent. And to make things worse, Brunt is also competing. Let me know in the comment, who will win this tournament? Angelica wonders if Renette ever gets tired of sticking to Rick like glue. She even jokes that people might start assuming they're lovers. But here's the plot twist. Renette is completely unfazed. Turns out she actually has feelings for him. Before Angelica can even process that revelation, a man suddenly rushes up to them, begging for help because he doesn't have enough workers. Meanwhile, Rick is approached by a man named Snape, the chairman of the West League Committee. Rick wonders how Snape knows him, and Snape explains that Rick is famous for being the fastest person to ever qualify from the West League. Another man reports that Angelica isn't present, and Rick is surprised that Snape knows her. Turns out, they're close. Rick, with his detective-level observation skills, suddenly asks Snape how long it's been since he gave up being a fighter. Snape is caught off guard. How did Rick figure that out? Rick explains that after shaking Snape's hand, he could tell his grip was that of a trained fighter. Snape reveals he won a small tournament 20 years ago, but retired at 23, making that his only victory. He also mentions that his company is sponsoring a participant in the tournament. Before leaving, he wants Rick to tell Angelica not to mess around too much. Meanwhile, Angelica and Renette are in bunny suits. Yes, you heard it right, bunny suits, trying to get people to place bets on the Fist King tournament. Another bunny girl praises Angelica's energy, but she groans that she didn't take the job because she liked it. Renette casually reminds her that she was the one who accepted the offer in the first place. A drunk man stumbles into the scene and starts harassing the bunny girls when he tries to mess with Angelica. She and Renette deliver a beatdown that makes sure he regrets all his life choices. Rick arrives just in time to witness the chaos and is completely speechless, but he got the real shock when he saw Renette in a bunny suit. At the gym, Kelvin and the old man are impressed. Brune managed to clear the East League qualifiers in just 2 days, and even Rick completed his in 4. Kelvin is thrilled at the prospect of fighting them. The look on his face makes the old man remember the moment he recruited him to Heratopia. The next day, Angelica is fuming at Rick for his reaction to her bunny suit. Rick and Renette try to reassure her that she looked cute, but she's still mad. Then, Rick casually mentions that he met Snape yesterday. That changes her mood real fast. She claims she doesn't know who he is. The league matches begin, determining who will enter the tournament. Angelica's first match is against a girl named Helen. Angelica goes all out from the start, but Helen dodges like a pro. When Helen tries to land a punch, Angelica blocks it. Rick and Renette notice something is off. Angelica is straining herself, which isn't like her. Still, she wins by launching Helen into a wall with a powerful kick. Rick and Angelica continue dominating their matches, but then things take a turn. Angelica has 4 matches left, and she needs to win 3 matches to qualify. In her next match, she faces a guy named Taylor. She attacks with lightning, but it does nothing. Taylor punches her straight into a wall, knocking her out and winning the match. Afterward, Rick asks why she kept using stamina draining techniques when it was obvious her opponent had strong defenses. Angelica ignores him and walks away. Rick, being persistent, keeps pressing her until she finally snaps. Snape is her fiancé. Rick is floored. Angelica explains that a year ago, her parents passed away, leaving her and her siblings in financial trouble. Her grandfather made a deal with Snape. He would support their family in exchange for Angelica's engagement. It saved them financially, but now it's too late to break the deal. Rick is stunned, and Angelica is annoyed that he didn't listen to the full story before freaking out. Suddenly, a thug named Jyath appears, hurting a woman who accidentally bumped into him. Taylor tries to intervene but gets slammed into the ground instantly. Things escalate when Jyath starts tearing the woman's clothes, but Angelica steps in, demanding that he stop. Instead, Jyath decides to attack her, but Rick steps in just in time. Snape arrives, casually telling Jyath to save his strength for the tournament. Jyath leaves, and Rick is even more suspicious when Snape refers to Jyath as his brother. Rick starts putting the pieces together. Did Snape sponsor the tournament because of his engagement with Angelica? She confirms it. Snape has poured a fortune into their engagement, but he doesn't have enough assets. He plans to make up for it by betting big on the tournament. Rick realizes that Snape is likely fixing the matches. Angelica believes Snape's fighter will take advantage of the sponsor slot, meaning she has to defeat him. But there's a problem. His fighter is Jyath, and she knows she can't beat him. Rick, however, has a plan. He offers to train her, and so training begins. Rick straps weights onto Angelica and ties her to himself. She's confused, but he just tells her to use strengthening magic. Then he starts running fast. She struggles to keep up, but he explains that by forcing her to move at his speed, her body will quickly adapt. She asks for a break, but he just smiles and says, "We'll rest after 6 hours." Angelica somehow survived the brutal training, which is a miracle in itself. Rick is genuinely shocked because, fun fact, when he went through the same training, he passed out multiple times. Turns out, Renette isn't just a trainer, she's an executioner in disguise. Angelica, now a walking corpse, is relieved to have made it through the first day, only for Rick to casually drop the bomb that this was just the warm-up, and thus the suffering continues. On the 5th day, Angelica finally snaps. She runs away like a fugitive and hides in a cafe, convinced that Rick won't find her. But Rick tracks her down in 15 minutes flat. Is he really a man or bloodhound? Expecting an earful, she's caught off guard when Rick tells her he understands why she ran. Apparently, he also wanted to quit during his training. In fact, he even died a couple of times. But Brune kept reviving him because apparently, death wasn't a good enough excuse to stop training. Instead, Brune told him to compare his current suffering with the regret he'd feel if he gave up. And somehow, that convinced him to keep going. Hearing this, Angelica opens up about how she's been forced to act like a noble her whole life, but it just doesn't suit her. She wants to contribute to her family in a different way, by fighting. Rick, impressed by her resolve, points out that she's already an excellent swordsman, but since a fighter needs to rely on their fists, he suggests a technique that turns her hands into metaphorical swords. Enter Renette, who's been summoned for a special kind of hellish training. Angelica's next match is against a guy named Silva, and everyone assumes she's in for a tough fight. The match begins, and she kicks him just once. Silva instantly goes down. Match over. Turns out Angelica has been so conditioned by training that she still thinks she's in survival mode. Even after the win, she tries to keep fighting. Later, Alice and Miz arrive, and Renette asks if they found the magic jewels in the Empire. They didn't. The information was bogus. Meanwhile, Brune shows up as well. And during dinner, Rick praises Angelica for how fast she's learning. She thinks it's not enough, but Brune reassures her, progress is progress, no matter how small. Finally, the tournament begins. Angelica quickly notices something shady. Giath won't face Kellen or Brune until the finals. The realization hits. This is all rigged. Snape's plan is obvious. He's building Giath up as an unstoppable force by pitting him against weaklings. When the betting odds skyrocket against Giath, Snape will bet on the underdog and make a fortune when Giath throws the fight. Angelica is determined to wreck his scheme because she's set to fight Giath in the second round. Meanwhile, Kelvin and his old master approach Brune and Rick. The old man observes that Kelvin has that same determined look from when he first joined the gym. Flashback time. When Kelvin first arrived, he was cocky and challenged a top-tier fighter, thinking he'd win easily. Spoiler, he got destroyed. That first loss flipped a switch in him, and he trained relentlessly until he eventually became a champion. Back in the present, the first match begins, and Giath's opponent, poor soul, throws a flurry of punches. Not a single one has any effect. Giath then knocks him out with a single blow. The audience is stunned, but Rick senses something off. Giath is strong, but his movements scream amateur. The other fights continue, and Rick, Angelica, and the others advance to the next round. In the final match of the first round, Kelvin faces Eddie. Eddie goes all in on offense, but Kelvin effortlessly counters with a single punch. Rick notices that Kelvin seems to predict Eddie's every move. Brune explains that Kelvin has an incredible sense of smell, allowing him to detect subtle changes in adrenaline and electrical signals. Out of nowhere, Eddie lands a solid hit, knocking Kelvin down. But Renette immediately realizes Kelvin let himself get hit on purpose. Why? To bait Eddie into an opening. The moment Eddie moves in again, Kelvin demolishes him. Match 1. The scene shifts to the next day. It's Angelica versus Giath. Before the match, Snape randomly asks Rick if he can sit next to him. Rick is confused. Why isn't Snape with the VIPs? But Snape claims that, as the brother of one fighter and the fiancé of the other, he wants a close view. Something's fishy. Meanwhile, Angelica approaches Giath and boldly tells him she'll show him the fruits of her training. Giath, however, laughs in her face, mocking her for even thinking she stands a chance. He brags that he's never trained a day in his life and only has his wealth to thank for his physique. Angelica calls BS. There's no way someone could get that ripped without training. Giath smirks and says he'll make sure not to hit her stomach so she can still bear Snape's children. Gross. The match starts, and Angelica lands a clean hit on Giath. No effect. She realizes she has no choice. She disables her strengthening magic. That surprises Giath, but before he can react, she lands another hit. This time, he bleeds. Snape is floored. Not even the sharpest blades have ever wounded Giath before. Renette explains. Angelica used a mana manipulation technique, something she secretly kept training even after their sessions ended. By combining it with mana reflex inversion, she created her own version of the technique. Miz, who's been observing, explains that this technique temporarily stores mana in the body, allowing for explosive output at the cost of bodily strain. Thanks to the hellish training she endured, Angelica can use it with ease. She continues her assault, but an annoyed Giath slams the ground, creating a dust cloud to blind her. He tries to attack from the smoke, but she dodges. He does it again, but this time, he attacks from behind, launching her into a wall. She uses Blink Step to reposition, but suddenly, Giath copies her move. He learns Blink Step just by watching her and immediately knocks her down again. Meanwhile, Snape casually tells Rick about the first time he met Giath. Back then, Snape was still trying to make a name for himself as a fighter. Giath destroyed him in a single move, which made Snape quit fighting altogether. Then, Snape drops another bomb. He's not fixing the tournament. No one believed a slot fighter would ever win, so he actually bet everything on Giath instead. Back in the match, Giath starts mercilessly beating Angelica while insulting her and her dead parents. Even as she's getting wrecked, she refuses to give up. This enrages Giath enough to want to kill her. As he goes for the final blow, Rick suddenly throws his shoe at him. The attack misses. Gyath, humiliated, storms over to fight Rick. But Rick just smirks and tells him, "I'll crush you in front of everyone." After winning his own match, Rick checks on Angelica. The nurses say she'll recover, but she needs rest. Meanwhile, Brune and Kelvin secure their victories, finalizing the tournament's top 4 fighters. The next day, Angelica, in bed and bandaged up, apologizes to Rick, feeling like she wasted his time training her. She breaks down, confessing that she only wanted to achieve her dreams, but now thinks she should just accept Snape's proposal. Rick, however, apologizes instead. He underestimated Gyath and failed to prepare her properly. But then, he tells her to watch the next match closely, because he's about to show her exactly what's possible when you refuse to give up. Meanwhile, back in the match, Gyath, still catching his breath, has the audacity to apologize. Not for being an insufferable jerk, but for not killing Angelica. Oh, that does it. Rick, already annoyed, doesn't waste a second. As soon as the match starts, he clocks Gyath square in the face, sending him to his knees. The crowd gasps. Angelica's jaw drops. Even Gyath is momentarily confused, like a guy who just realized his unbreakable phone screen isn't so unbreakable. Gyath retaliates with a punch, but Rick effortlessly dodges, landing another hit that makes Gyath spit blood, like he just took a bad sip of expired milk. Angelica is in shock. Rick is way stronger than she expected. But Renette casually explains that Rick is barely using any strength. Instead, he's utilizing an Aki attack, a technique that bypasses external toughness and deals damage internally. In short, no matter how sturdy Gyath's muscles are, his insides are still as vulnerable as a soggy paper towel. Enraged, Gyath activates his strengthening magic, his body crackling with raw power. He lunges at Rick, who instead of standing his ground, turns tail and runs. But then, Gyath catches up and knocks him down. Brune observes that Gyath's magic is burning through an absurd amount of mana, and Snape, who, let's be real, is always scheming, points out that Gyath never trained to expand his mana reserves. He's running purely on what he was born with, which makes Rick even madder because he had to scrape and claw for every ounce of his power. Nothing's worse than fighting someone who got their abilities on a silver platter. Rick lands another Aki attack, but Gyath barely flinches this time. Instead, he pummels Rick with a barrage of blows. Snape smugly assumes the fight is over, but Brune knows better. Rick doesn't care what the audience thinks. His only concern is how Angelica sees this fight. Gyath keeps hammering away, but suddenly, he realizes something horrifying. Rick hasn't actually taken any damage. Renette explains that Rick has been using a body manipulation technique that disperses impact throughout his entire body, effectively nullifying Gyath's attacks. The realization hits Gyath like a truck. Rick has been holding back this whole time, and not just a little. He's been fighting at Angelica's level, deliberately showing her the heights she could reach with more training. Furious, Gyath coats his body in steel and charges. Rick, unfazed, unleashes an Aki attack so powerful it shatters the armor like cheap glass. Rick critiques Gyath's magic control, pointing out that he's never been tired in his life, so he doesn't know how to function when exhausted. Snape starts wondering if Rick is actually a greater prodigy than Gyath, but the others laugh. Nope, Rick has no natural talent. He just worked 10 times harder than anyone else, and that's what makes him terrifying. Gyath, humiliated, unleashes his ultimate trump card, his dragon transformation. His power surges, and he goes berserk, landing brutal hits on Rick. Even Rick struggles to fight back at first, realizing that in her current state, Angelica wouldn't stand a chance against this version of Gyath. So, Rick does what he does best. He levels up mid-fight. He starts increasing his speed and power, showing Angelica what she could achieve if she continued training for just one more year. Rick finally knocks Gyath down, telling him the only way to win is to fight with sheer willpower. But Gyath refuses to struggle, refuses to grow. Disappointed, Rick decides to end the fight. Gyath tries his dust cloud trick again to obscure his movements, but Rick counters using Angelica's own technique. The crowd watches in awe as Rick delivers the final blow, winning the match. Yet, as he stands over Gyath's defeated form, he frowns. The technique still wasn't perfect. If Renette had done it, Gyath would have been sliced clean in half. Angelica, overwhelmed with emotion, thanks Rick for everything he's taught her, promising to become an even stronger fighter. Meanwhile, Snape, for the first time, admits that part of him actually wanted Gyath to lose. He reveals that Gyath was the one who crushed his dreams of becoming a fighter, and now that he's been defeated, Snape feels lighter. He even jokes that it's a shame he can't marry Angelica now. though she scoffs, thinking he just wanted to marry into nobility. But Snape insists he genuinely liked her. But there's no time for romance. The next match is about to begin. The old man tells Kelvin that he's the strongest fighter here and advises him not to hold back. His opponent? Brune, the reigning champion. The announcer hypes up the fight and the crowd goes wild for Brune, their beloved champ. The battle starts and Kelvin wastes no time, launching a flurry of attacks. But Brune easily blocks and counters, creating a shockwave that shakes the arena. Kelvin grins, finally facing a real challenge. But before the fight can escalate, the arena wall shatters. A crazed Gaiath appears, now completely lost to his dragon blood, rampaging like a wild beast. Snape's face goes pale. Gaiath's dragon instincts have gone berserk. Kelvin, annoyed at the interruption, tells Gaiath to sit down. Gaiath doesn't listen. In one clean hit, Kelvin sends Gaiath flying. The entire audience goes silent. Renette, eyes wide, realizes that Kelvin is at the level of an S-rank fighter. The announcer scrambles to maintain order, announcing that the fight will be rescheduled for tomorrow. Kelvin sighs, disappointed that his fun was cut short, while Brune quietly notes that Kelvin was still holding back. Later that night, Rick goes for a jog, ending up near the country's border. There, he finds Kelvin training alone. Kelvin, seeing Rick, figures it's perfect timing. He needs a sparring partner. Before Rick can refuse, Kelvin lunges. Rick has no choice but to fight back. The two exchange blows, and Rick is impressed. Kelvin blocked his punch, reacting instantly. Curious, Rick asks why Kelvin got hit so easily in the tournament. Kelvin explains he loves fighting. When he first started competing, he demolished everyone with a single punch. It got boring. Then one day, he overheard the old man and his business partner worrying. The audience was getting tired of predictable fights. If the matches lost excitement, people would stop coming to the gym. Realizing he was the problem, Kelvin decided to throw his next fight on purpose. The crowd loved it. So, from then on, he started pretending he struggled against opponents to keep things entertaining. Rick listens, then smirks. Well, you won't need to hold back against Brune. The next day, the arena is packed again. The announcer reassures the crowd that defense magic has been installed to prevent further rampages. The fight begins. Kelvin wraps his arm in a wind vortex, launching relentless attacks. Brune counters effortlessly, forcing Kelvin to back off. The champ calls Kelvin out. He's still holding back. Kelvin admits it, but also states that if he went all out, people would realize he's been deceiving them this whole time. Brune scoffs, deciding to fight with only 2 fingers to make things fair. Kelvin charges, but Brune grabs him and slams him into the ground. The crowd cheers for Kelvin, and he hesitates. Should he finally fight seriously? From the stands, the old man yells at him, "You idiot! Stop holding back! My dream is to train the strongest fighter in the world, and that fighter is you!" Kelvin, finally letting go of his self-imposed restrictions, attacks with everything he has. Brune, realizing the kid's not playing anymore, stops using his only 2 fingers. This is going to be a real fight. As he explains that he's blocking with the appropriate level, Kelvin manages to land a kick, but it has no effect, and Brune throws him away. Kelvin, still high off his last battle, crashes into the wall, using his steel body like some kind of anime pinball. He grins, claiming he's having the time of his life. But the crowd? Oh, they're not having it. The moment they realize he's been deceiving them, their cheers turn into a collective boo that shakes the stadium. But does Kelvin care? Nope, he just shrugs, then casually casts a 5th level fire spell like it's no big deal. Rick, watching from the sidelines, gulps. Kelvin's not just some lucky fighter. He's got raw talent that rivals the best. But before the fire spell can do any real damage, Brune simply raises a stone wall and effortlessly shatters it, retaliating with an attack that sends shockwaves across the arena. Kelvin, being the show-off he is, closes the distance in an instant and whips out a 7th level nature spell to restrain Brune. But he doesn't stop there. He flexes even harder and pulls out an 8th level advanced magic spell, summoning a massive meteor from the sky. Angelica, witnessing this insanity, nearly chokes. Meanwhile, Rick's face turns pale. If Kelvin is pulling out these kinds of moves, it means Brune might finally stop holding back, and that's terrifying. As the meteor hurtles toward the battlefield, Brune does what any reasonable person would do. He punches it. And just like that, the colossal rock shatters into oblivion. Angelica is speechless. Rick, he's just trying not to pass out from stress. Brune, however, is actually grinning. "I can feel your conviction through your attacks," he tells Kelvin. And just like that, he decides to reciprocate. Rick, now fully panicking, realizes Brune is about to get serious. The second he moves, a shockwave erupts, blasting Kelvin across the arena like a rag doll. Kelvin throws every spell he has at Brune, but nothing lands. And then his mana runs out. Brune sees his opening, dashes forward, and delivers a devastating punch that sends Kelvin sprawling. Rick can tell that Kelvin barely managed to block it, but even with defensive magic, he looks wrecked. Thoughts of giving up crossed Kelvin's mind, but then the crowd started cheering. Something ignites in him. This is what he always wanted, a fight that pushes him to his absolute limit. Fueled by the energy of the stadium, Kelvin stands up, combines every skill he has, and unleashes a final all-or-nothing attack. He actually lands a hit on Brune, and for the first time, everyone sees him move. It's a victory in itself. Brune acknowledges him, asks if he gave it his all, and when Kelvin confirms, he finishes the fight. After the battle, Rick and Angelica congratulate Brune, and Rick casually suggests withdrawing from the next match to get the magic jewel. Easy, right? But Brune just grins. "I'm looking forward to our fight," then he walks away. Rick freaking out. Meanwhile, Kelvin is brooding over a newspaper, realizing the entire country now hates him for deceiving them. He turns to the old man, asking if this disaster is okay, but the old man just shrugs. Then, he drops the real question. That last move, what was it? Kelvin has no idea. He was too in the moment to remember. And now, he feels like he's lost everything. But the old man reassures him. "You're like a son to me. You'll bounce back." Then, Brune casually walks in and offers to heal him. Kelvin, still being dramatic, declines. "I want to feel this pain." Brune nods, respecting his resolve, and then mentions that he's excited to watch the final match. Meanwhile, Rick has gone full shut-in mode, locking himself in his room. Angelica tries to get him out. The fight's tomorrow. Rick replies, "Yeah, and I don't want to die." Snape decides to guilt-trip him into fighting by singing about how thousands of people worked hard for this tournament, and how millions are waiting to see the final match. Rick, emotionally compromised, starts feeling bad. Angelica reminds him that Brune can literally revive him if he dies, but Rick rightfully argues that dying is still a traumatic experience. Angelica, frustrated, walks away. "I thought you were my mentor, but maybe I was wrong." Ms. then drops a bombshell. Brune actually wanted to train Rick from the start because he saw potential in him. Turns out, orcs love fighting, but Brune is too strong. Nobody gives him a challenge. His dream is to find someone who can fight him seriously. Ms. tells Rick he can back out, but he should at least understand Brune's feelings first. Flashback time. 2 years ago, Renette introduced Rick to the Orc Coliseum Fist, where he met Brune. The moment Brune shook Rick's hand, he knew Rick had zero talent. But instead of giving up on him, Brune said, "Train harder than everyone else." And so began the most brutal training of Rick's life. Back in the present, Angelica calls Rick pathetic, wondering if his training was really that bad. Ms. says it was worse. She explains that Rick's training was beyond insane, and it's a miracle he didn't lose his mind. She also reveals that Rick actually does have a special skill, but it destroys his body, so Brune forbade him from using it. That night, Rick sulks, asking Renette if she thinks he's lame. She reassures him that he's not, but she also wants him to fight Brune. The next day, the final match is about to begin. Snape is sweating bullets. If Rick backs out, the event is ruined. The announcer hypes up the battle. The winner gets $300 million in prize money, 2 hot spring tickets, and, oh yeah, the title of champion. Rick, despite still looking terrified, steps into the arena. Renette gives him one last motivational push. If he wins, then she will go to the hot spring with Rick. Brune and Rick face off. Rick promises to fight with everything he has, and just like that, the battle begins. Rick goes full speed, unleashing a flurry of blows so fast that Snape thinks he must be using magic. But Renette corrects him that they are not. They just exchanged 100 blows in an instant, and Rick has actually landed a hit using his slicing technique. The fight intensifies. Rick dodges everything Brune throws at him, but suddenly, Brune appears right next to him, ready to finish it. In a last-second move, Rick activates a basic air cushion spell without chanting, impressing everyone. Rick reveals that Miss and Alice taught him the move, and without missing a beat, he rushes forward. Brune, ready to blast him into next week, launches an attack, but Rick leaps into the sky and counters with his air shot. Brune blocks it with ease. Angelica watches in awe, realizing that a battle between S-rankers is on an entirely different level. Brunt acknowledges Rick's improvement, genuinely glad that Rick endured his training. Since Brunt is incapable of flattery, Rick knows he means it, but he isn't satisfied yet. He wants Brunt to see him as an equal. He reveals that he knows about Brunt's true dream, thanks to Ms. spilling the beans. Rick wants to give Brunt the fight he's always longed for. With 2 years of grueling training behind them, Brunt thinks it's time to share the origins of the orichalcum fist. Flashback. 46 years ago, a young Brunt lived among the orcs but felt different. Unlike his kin, who communicated through brute force, Brunt had a thirst for knowledge. He would read books dropped by humans, learning their language. But his intelligence only isolated him. The other orcs revered him as a god, yet no one truly understood him. One fateful day, a storm ravaged their land. When Brunt returned, he found his people dead. Strangely, he felt nothing. The loneliness that had always lurked in the shadows completely consumed him. One night, as he sat reading by the fire, a warrior named Reinhardt attacked him, mistaking him for a threat. Shocked to find an orc reading, Reinhardt stopped. Even more surprising was Brunt's ability to communicate. Intrigued, Reinhardt asked about his story. Brunt shared his desire to find an equal, a true rival. Reinhardt, a former ally of the legendary hero Yano, suggested a different path. Instead of seeking a rival, why not pursue a challenge beyond measure? Reinhardt spoke of the Kaiser, a force so powerful that only the strongest dared to face it. If Brunt chased after the Kaiser, he might finally find warriors who could match him. Thus, the orichalcum fist was born. Brunt gathered powerful fighters, but while they possessed unique strengths, none gave him the brawl he truly craved. He designed an extreme training regimen, but abandoned it, believing no one could survive it. Then came Rick, living proof that life was full of surprises. Rick reflects on the time Brunt invested in him. Every single day for 2 years, Brunt supervised his training. Now, Rick wants to repay that dedication with the ultimate fight. Brunt, touched, acknowledges this, and without hesitation, they throw themselves into battle. The arena shakes. Rick discards his fear, pushing himself beyond his limits. Ms. notices the barrier beginning to crack and uses divine magic to evacuate the spectators. Kelvin, stunned, questions his actions, but Ms. insists it was necessary for everyone's safety. The barrier shatters. Snape, witnessing the sheer destruction, is speechless. Meanwhile, Rick lands multiple blows on Brunt, even managing to shatter his necklace. But Brunt's attacks are heavier, dealing more damage. Despite being flung across the battlefield, Rick refuses to surrender. They trade blow after blow, and for the first time, Brunt truly enjoys himself. Then, Brunt goes all out. With a single devastating attack, he sends Rick flying, obliterating half the arena in the process. As the dust settles, Rick wonders if he's done enough to satisfy Brunt, but then he sees it. Brunt, still standing, completely unfazed. Determined to prove himself, Rick taps into a hidden reserve of power. Brunt, surprised, watches as Rick activates a skill he shouldn't be capable of using. Alice, in the audience, smirks. This was part of their secret training. Rick charges, surpassing his limits. In that moment, Brunt realizes something profound. He had spent his life searching for an equal, blind to the friends who had been by his side all along. He wasn't alone anymore. They both push past their boundaries. With everything they have left, they launch their final attacks. A blinding explosion of light engulfs the battlefield. When the dust settles, Brunt is still standing, but just barely. Rick, exhausted, collapses. He can't believe how powerful Brunt truly is. But then, Brunt thanks him for fulfilling his dream, and then he falls over too. 3 days later, Rick wakes up to find Renette beside him. Ms. informs him of the situation. He's been out cold. He notices the championship belt around his waist and is utterly confused. Brunt, now recovered, explains that while he technically won the match, Rick won the fight. With that, the battle finally over, the team secures the second magic jewel and swaps it out with a replica. Rick takes a moment to appreciate their progress. They're one step closer to reaching the legendary Kaiser. But then, curiosity gets the best of him. Wait a minute, Reinhardt's story took place 200 years ago. How is he still alive? Brunt casually explains that Reinhardt has an inherent skill that extends his lifespan. Rick, impressed, starts wondering where the guy is now. Brunt, completely unfazed, drops the truth bomb. Nah, he's on the run because he forgot to return some books. Rick is left speechless. Meanwhile, Snape delivers some unexpected news. Both Rick and Brunt decline the championship title. That means the winner by default is Kelvin. Kelvin, the man who scammed half the tournament and barely survived his matches, is now the reigning champion. Even he looks confused, mumbling something about not deserving the belt. Meanwhile, Golden Militia cry dramatically as Brunt prepares to leave. Later, we see Rick and the others packing up souvenirs for their neighbors. But Brunt just stands there, watching them with a rare smile. For the first time in his life, he's not alone. As the group parts ways, Angelica makes a bold declaration. She's coming back. Because she asked Brunt to train her. Rick stares at her, dumbfounded. Is she insane? Angelica, unfazed, vows to catch up to Rick and even surpass him. Rick sighs and tells her he looks forward to it, already bracing himself for the chaos she'll bring. Then he casually mentions he'll be running back to the castle for extra training. Angelica, assuming it's a short jog, asks how far it is. 3,000 kilometers, Rick replies like it's no big deal. She nearly passes out. That would take months on a carriage, but Alice reassures her. They can just buff the horse. Ms. casts a spell on the horse, and suddenly, the horse looks like it just spent 6 months in the gym, completely shredded. Just as Rick prepares to leave, Renette brings up the hot spring trip. Rick immediately turns bright red, lost in an entirely different kind of imagination. But before he can even process that, Brunt drops another bombshell. He technically didn't win their match. Ms. suggests a tiebreaker, a race back to the castle. If Rick wins, he gets his hot springs trip. If he loses, his training gets multiplied by 100. Before Rick can even argue, Alice yells, "Go!" Ms. and Brunt take off like lightning. Rick, left standing there, looks absolutely destroyed. But then, with a determined grin, he turns to Renette. "I will win this." And with that, he bolts after them. As they all race toward the castle, Rick reflects on everything. He's finally become an adventurer, fulfilling a dream he once thought was impossible. But he knows this isn't the end, because every dream fulfilled only means another one is waiting. And that's where this video ends. Don't forget to like and subscribe to AnySage10 and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.